let me tell you about a strange moment from June 2026. One of the richest companies on Earth wanted something and got told no. The company was Meta. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, tens of billions in cash. Its own AI models, world-class engineers, everything you'd think you need. But Meta wanted more computing power for its AI. So it went to buy capacity for Google's Gemini models. Simple deal, right? Around March, Google gave an answer almost nobody expected. It said basically, "We can't give you that much." Not won't. Couldn't. The shortfall reportedly delayed some of Meta's internal AI projects. And inside the company, staff were told to use their AI tokens more carefully. Now hold on, Meta has money, Meta has its own models, Meta has data centers, so why was it suddenly the one waiting? Here's the question I want you to sit with today. In the AI era, who actually holds the power, the buyer or the seller? Because the market we grew up with worked one way, and what's happening now flips it completely. Let me show you how. For most of our lives, software felt free. You build an app once and a million people use it at the same time. No problem. Copying code costs almost nothing. That's why the internet scaled so fast. One server, endless users, we got used to that magic. But generative AI broke that rule. Every question you ask sets off a physical chain reaction somewhere you'll never see. A chip lights up, it pulls electricity, it throws off heat, a cooling system kicks in. Every answer has a body, not just a brain. Those tokens, the little units that measure AI use, look like abstract numbers. But each one is built on power, silicon, and water. So the bottleneck in AI isn't only how smart the model is, it's whether there's enough machinery to actually run it. And that machinery is brutal. The leading AI supercomputer in early 2025 cost around $7 billion and drew 300 megawatts of power. 300 megawatts. That's roughly the electricity of 250,000 homes for one cluster of chips. Does that scale even feel real? Global data center electricity use is projected to nearly double by 2030 to around 945 terawatt hours. That's a whole country's worth of power. So when I say AI floats in the cloud, forget the cloud. It runs on the ground, in buildings full of chips, drinking power. Now here's where it gets interesting. In a normal market, the customer is king. You have money, you choose. The seller competes for you. But flip the supply. Make the thing everyone needs painfully scarce. Suddenly the power shifts. Now the seller gets to choose the customer. And that's exactly what's happening with AI compute. When there isn't enough to go around, the supplier starts asking quiet questions. Questions like, who will sign the longest contract? Who will pay the most? Who helps our ecosystem? Who's strategically useful, and who's a rival? In that moment, the AI infrastructure company stops being a simple vendor. It becomes something older and heavier. It becomes a rationer. It sets your token limits. It sets your API priority. It decides how fast your project moves. Sometimes, whether it moves at all. Think about how much that is. They're not just selling you a product. They're holding a dial on your ambition. And the concentration makes it worse. One company, Nvidia, designs the vast majority of AI chips, over 80% of the market. One foundry, TSMC in Taiwan, fabricates almost every leading AI chip on Earth. The whole world's hardware leans on a few buildings. Cloud? 3 companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, dominate it. At nearly every layer of this supply chain, the door is narrow. So when capacity runs short, you can't just walk to a competitor. There barely is one. That's what scarcity plus concentration does. Which brings me to the line I keep coming back to. In the AI era, the powerful party isn't the buyer with money. It's the seller with compute. Now let me take you somewhere completely unexpected. We are going back about 700 years to the cold trading ports of Northern Europe. There was a power here. Not a king, not an empire. Quieter than both, and in some ways, harder to escape. It was called the Hanseatic League. A network of merchants and towns stretching across the North Sea and the Baltic. At its peak, more than 200 towns were part of it. From London to Novgorod, Bergen to Bruges. A web, not a kingdom. The Hanse didn't rule huge territory. It didn't have a standing army or a capital. So where did its power actually come from? It came from the Chokepoints. The Hanse controlled the ports, the ships, the warehouses, the trading posts, the trust between merchants. Here's the line to remember. Medieval kings owned the land, but the Hanseatic League owned the routes. The roads the goods had to travel. And if you wanted to sell in Northern Europe, you couldn't ignore those routes. A town that wanted to thrive had to plug into the network. So the Hanse's strength didn't come from selling the most stuff. It came from owning the path the stuff had to pass through. They built their grip cleverly, too. Trade privileges only members could use. Shared rules. Standardized weights and measures. A trusted club closed to outsiders. They could reward you with access, or punish you by cutting it off. In 1358, they simply pulled out of a Flemish market. The economic pain hit so hard the city of Bruges and the Count of Flanders had to come back and negotiate. That's leverage. Notice what the weapon was. Not soldiers, not swords. Just the power to say, you don't get to use our network anymore. Doesn't that start to sound familiar? Hold that feeling, because now we're going to bring it all the way into 2026. Let me line them up for you, side by side, then and now. Because honestly, the rhyme between them is almost too clean. The medieval port? Today, that's the data center, the place every flow of value has to pass through to reach the market. The Hanse's ships? Today, those are the GPU and TPU servers, the vessels that carry the cargo. Only now the cargo is computation. The trading posts, the contours. Today, those are the APIs and cloud platforms, the gateways where you're let in or kept out, the Hanse's special travel privileges. Today, those are long-term cloud contracts and priority access. The right to move faster than everyone else, and the Hanse's old weapon, the trade boycott. Today, it becomes a token limit, an API restriction, a quiet price increase. The medieval merchant had to use the port. The modern company has to use the data center. Same dependency, 700 years apart. The medieval town needed the trade route. The modern company needs compute. Without it, the experiments you can't run, the products you can't build. And remember the switching barriers? Back then it was guild rules and closed networks. Today it's egress fees, proprietary software, locked ecosystems. Nvidia's CUDA software, for example, ties your work to their hardware. Switching means rebuilding everything. That's a moat, not an accident. So here's how I'd put it. The future's port is the data center. The future's ship is the GPU. The future's travel pass is the token limit. The Hanseatic League of the AI age isn't being built on the open sea. It's being built quietly between the rows of server racks. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is a corporate fight. Big companies squabbling over chips. Why should I care? Here is exactly why you should. Because the same dependency is quietly climbing up to a much bigger level. Not just companies, whole countries. At first, it's businesses bolting AI onto everything. Search, ads, coding, customer service, logistics, finance, healthcare, education, the obvious stuff. But give it time, and governments need the same engine for administration, defense, cybersecurity, disaster response, medical systems, intelligence analysis. And here's the catch. If a nation doesn't build enough of its own compute, it ends up running its core functions on private infrastructure. The data backs this up. Companies now own around 80% of AI supercomputing power. Back in 2019, it was about 40%. The public sector's share fell below 20%. Governments used to lead this. Now, increasingly, they rent. Let that sink in. And the geography is lopsided too. The United States hosts roughly 75% of the world's AI supercomputer performance. China is a distant second, so countries everywhere are scrambling. Canada committed $2 billion to sovereign AI compute. France, the UK, the EU, Korea, all racing to build their own. Why the panic? Because access to compute can be blocked. The US already controls key choke points and uses export controls on advanced chips. In that world, a company doesn't rule a country outright. That's too strong a phrase. But it can quietly shrink a country's options. It can limit your cost, limit your speed, limit your access, limit your independence. Not with commands, but with a thumb on the valve. And here's the unsettling part. If a nation's ability to think and decide depends on a few companies' data centers, that's already a new kind of dependence. Now I want to be careful here. This isn't a story about evil corporations. That's too easy, and honestly, it misses the point. The problem isn't that companies are bad. The problem is the nature of the infrastructure itself. It pulls toward concentration. Watch the loop. More customers means a better model. A better model brings more revenue. More revenue builds more data centers. More data centers pull in more customers, and around it spins. Each turn makes the leader stronger and the latecomer further behind. In a loop like that, catching up is brutally hard. So the market naturally collapses toward a few giant choke points. Sound familiar yet? And remember, the Hansa didn't start out trying to threaten kings. It started as merchants just wanting to trade safely together. But that network became so essential that it ended up limiting the choices of cities and kingdoms. Convenience hardened into power. AI infrastructure is walking the same path. It starts as a helpful service. But when a service becomes the foundation of everything, the provider becomes infrastructure power. And here's the line I really want you to keep. The most dangerous power isn't the one that gives you orders. It's the one that quietly shrinks your choices. You still feel free. You're just choosing from a smaller and smaller menu. That's the trap. So let's come back to where we started. Meta. Rich, powerful, fully equipped. Waiting in line for compute it couldn't buy. Think back. Medieval kings owned the land. The Hanseatic League owned the routes, and the routes, it turned out, mattered far more. Today, nations have laws and armies. But the AI companies own the routes that computation has to travel. The new choke points. So here's the open question I want to leave you with tonight. Will companies and countries manage to build their own AI ports? Or will they spend the coming decades paying harbor fees to a handful of giant AI Hanseatic Leagues? We genuinely don't know yet. We've spent this whole era asking who's smartest, who's fastest, who sounds the most human. But maybe that was never the real question. Maybe the real question is simpler and heavier. In the future, whose data centers will the world be thinking on? That's a wrap for today. Next time someone asks you who wins the AI race, ask them back. Who owns the harbor? See you soon.